Good morning and welcome to the joint session with the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee and the Treasury Committee on our session looking at housing affordability. I'm Florence Shalomi, I'm the Chair of the Select Committee. Could we get our ministers and guests to introduce themselves, please?
Yep, I'm Melanie Montanari, Director of Housing and Strategy and Markets at MHCLG.
I'm Matthew Pennycook, I'm the Housing and Planning Minister.
And I'm Lucy Rigby, I'm the Economic Secretary to the Treasury.
I'm Alanna, Barber, Deputy Director for Banking and Credit at the Treasury.
Thank you for joining us this morning, Minister and officials. House building and housing continues to be a key feature for this government. Obviously, for that to work, we need cooperation between MHCLG and Treasury. So we are really grateful to have you both with us this morning. We have a series of questions just looking at some of the issues around your two portfolios and briefs. I just wanted to start off, Minister Pennycook, looking back to the 2025 budget a few months ago. There was no new funding for house building or dealing with some of the issues that we've heard as a committee around housing affordability. Obviously, the government have a massive and really good, ambitious target on building 1.5 million new homes. Are you confident that the government can solve the housing affordability issues when there's no new money coming into the system?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak about this important topic. I am confident that we have the tools we need to drive up housing supply, to tackle the other challenges in the housing market. You all know at the spending review we got a significant allocation, £39 billion for a 10-year social and affordable homes programme, approximately £5 billion for land and infrastructure grant funding, circa £16 billion of financial support for the new National Housing Bank, which we're in the process of establishing. So we do have the tools at our disposal through the spending review allocation to take forward the programmes that we've spoken about at previous sessions with your committee.
So those levers you feel are going to be sufficient in terms of, you've got the 39, which is over the 10 years, National Delivery Fund, some of the issues around National Housing Bank and the subsidy from Homes England, all of that will achieve the really big ambitious programme you have.
At the risk of sort of slightly worrying my Treasury colleagues, would I have liked more money for all of those pots? Absolutely. But we have got what we need to take forward the very ambitious plans that we've set out. And things like the new National Housing Bank, I might bring Melanie on that, a new novel public finance institution that will allow us to do things that we haven't been able to do before. So there is significant financial firepower, if you like, behind that, and grant funding through those other pots to take things forward. And as you know, we'll very shortly open the new Social and Affordable Homes programme for bids to come in to start moving that £39 billion out the door.
So just to add on the National Housing Bank, I think as well as the funding, the thing that is really important is the flexibility that the Financial Transactions Control Framework brings to use the money flexibly across years and to bring inward investment. So we expect over £50 billion of private investment to come in as well. So that money is to enable unlocking of wider investment, which is crucial to delivering our objectives.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask the Economic Secretary for her perspective then, in terms of the amounts of money that the Housing Minister has just outlined, what is the Treasury expecting those sums of money to deliver?
I mean, fundamentally, we're expecting them to deliver more houses, and then that's obviously not the sole element of the Treasury's work. What we've been, as you know, working hard to do is to make sure that there is demand as well as supply by trying to ensure that mortgages are more affordable for people, but we're also helping people to save for deposits as well. So there are a range of ways in which we are working with MHCLG and indeed across government to ensure that we get more first-time buyers onto the housing ladder and that houses are more affordable. Essentially, more and more people right across the country achieving the dream of home ownership, which unfortunately has been out of reach for too many for too long.
And I think there will be questions on that later, but I just wondered in terms of the more housing, have you set specific targets for each year? What kind of metrics does the Treasury have to evaluate how well the Housing Department is delivering with the sums of money that you've allocated?
I don't think from a Treasury point of view, my officials will correct me if I'm wrong, but we have specific targets. I think if there are, you wouldn't necessarily expect the Treasury to. I think they would be in the domain of MHCLG. But as I said, we are working very closely to try and make sure that we have both supply and demand, because of course both of those things have to be in balance, else you get the housing market becomes overheated and fundamentally we don't achieve what we want to, which is more people on the housing ladder.
But I'm sure you wouldn't have allocated 39 billion without an expectation of a certain number of houses to be delivered.
Can I come in on that, Chair? We, through the 39 billion, will open the new programme for bids in the coming weeks. At the point that those bids come in, both the GLA and Homes England, respectively controlling the funds, will set target ranges for what is to be produced through that grant funding. So we will have, just as the last Affordable Homes programme had a target revised downward ultimately, but we will have targets for what we expect that grant funding to provide for, both in London and outside London.
So just to be clear, you're asking the targets will follow the bids. So it's about what's possible.
We set out when we established the programme our estimate that the new programme could deliver around 300,000 homes over its lifetime, about 180,000 of which are homes for social rent. That will become more refined as bids come in from providers, both through strategic partnerships route and continuous market engagement routes.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the Treasury has allocated a specific sum which was set due to the affordability then, rather than to aim for a particular number of homes. But were there any particular areas of contention between the two departments at the time of the spending review? Yes.
Yeah, I hesitate because I wasn't in post, Dame Harriet, but my officials may be able to. Didn't have sight either. Alanna says.
I don't remember any real issues of tension with Treasury colleagues. We certainly had a live discussion about, for example, what would implementing rent convergence look like in terms of its practicalities, and we've ironed those out and made that announcement in recent weeks, as you'll know.
And if I might add, the sort of ongoing discussions at official level doesn't stop with the announcement of the overall amounts of money. So we obviously have detailed business cases on the kind of detail, and Treasury officials are really closely involved in that process as it goes forward, and provide really helpful scrutiny and challenge through that process.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pennycook, yourself, your Secretary of State and your previous Secretary of State have been challenged by our committee about benchmarking, about how you're going to get to the 1.5 million homes. Just building on the previous conversation about the 39 billion from Treasury, will our committee get sight of what benchmarking you're looking to achieve so that we can track whether your government is on track to deliver the ambitious programme that you've set out? Because I think the frustration we've had in previous committee meetings is the soundbite of 1.5 million homes is ambitious and we support it, but we've yet to see any detail behind that to challenge and be critical friends on that basis.
And I think, Mr. Mahindra, at sort of risk of relitigating the extensive exchanges we've had on this subject, we've got a very clear, ambitious 1.5 million target over the course of this Parliament. Every member of this committee, every member of the House, every member of the public can track our progress towards that target in terms of net additional completions. It's the publicly accessible figure that's been used over the past 24 years by governments of all stripes to track housing delivery. So you'll be able to see our progress towards that target. We've always really been clear, as we've gone through before. Again, we didn't set an annual target, not least because we knew at the point that we arrived in government, we'd inherited a housing downturn exacerbated by the anti-supply changes made by the last government. We knew we'd be in a very difficult situation and that starts and completions would be at a low level, following through with the constrained supply, the reduced number of applications coming through. But it's a whole of Parliament target, and anyone will be able to track it through that well understood, well recognised
simplicity of my
metric.
For the committee, could you get your officials to send us where we should be looking to get that 1.5 million tracking.
Net additional completions?
Yep. Just if you could
after this session ends, I'll come and Google it on your phone and find it.
I'm not letting you anywhere near my phone, but...
any member of the committee, have a go, Google it. You'll be able to very quickly find where the official statistics are.
Just going back to the question I was meant to be asking, Minister Pennycook, do you have everything you need from Treasury to achieve what you need to as a department? And if not, now I think is your opportunity to nudge your Treasury colleagues to...
Well, we have a really, really constructive relationship with Treasury colleagues across all of the areas we'll discuss today, demand side as well as supply side. We do now, and I think over recent weeks, let's take social and affordable housing, which you've rightly focused on in these opening questions. Now that we have clarity over rent convergence, over our new modernised decent home standard, over what minimum energy efficiency standards look like, over that grant funding package, that sector now has everything it needs. I provided a progress update to Parliament in the form of a written ministerial statement on this very issue. The sector now has everything it needs to be able to business plan over the next 10 plus years and putting what we hope will be really ambitious bids into that new programme. And then we can start to see spades in the ground and new affordable homes come through. I'm sure there'll be further conversations about policy matters with Treasury, and we keep all of these matters under live review, as you'd expect.
Lewis, did you want to come in quickly? Is that fine? Sarah?
I just wanted to go back slightly on what you said before and just check that I had understood it clearly. You said that obviously the ambition for 180,000 homes being made for affordable rent as part of the programme was the target. But it's now subject to the bids that are received, or is the requirement of those bids to still achieve that number? Is there a risk here that we see a reduction in the number of homes being made for affordable rent because of the bid process and what's been learnt in recent months?
If I could, I will try to clarify as best I can, and then Melanie may want to add. It's very difficult to estimate the precise number of homes you will get from a 10-year programme. We did make the best estimate we could that we think that programme over its lifetime will produce around 300,000 homes, about 180,000 of which are for social rent, because the parameters of the programme are very clear. We're targeting 60% of that 39 billion social rented homes. But it will be refined on the basis of bids. The government doesn't allocate doesn't make the choices about what bids come in. That is for registered providers of affordable housing, councils, housing associations. We've encouraged them to put really ambitious bids in. We've given them the clarity they need over the regulatory environment. But we will refine, and then we'll set, as I said, publish targets for both the GLA and Homes England based on the bids that come in. So we will refine those targets as we go. But that was our best estimate based on everything we know about what we can achieve over the lifetime of that 10-year programme.
Thank you. Just moving on to house prices, obviously I think you were in the Financial Times recently with an article, Minister. Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So obviously the dream of home ownership for young people has receded over the last 15 years or so. We've seen house prices consistently go up faster than incomes. And as the Chair has said, Minister Pennycook, you've been on record in the Financial Times recently saying as more units are built, as more homes are built, you think the level of house prices will gradually come down. Do you have a target for that? Do you expect it to come down sharply? What are your objectives around that?
I don't have I think it'd be a fool's errand to have a target for house prices, and there's a degree of short-term fluctuation. If I give the committee my best sense of what will happen, I think, and there two things can be true at the same time. I think there's very strong evidence to attest to the fact that building homes of any tenure, including for private market sale, makes other housing more affordable in the short term and in a localised sense. If you flood a local housing market with homes of any tenure, you will have a positive impact on housing affordability. And there's lots of evidence, as I said, to attest to that. There's a really interesting, for example, GLA note from August 2023, which makes clear that supply of any kind, as I said, has those short-term localised impacts by creating chains of vacancies and moves that can reach across an entire housing market area. So therefore making more available, more affordable homes for people, including on low incomes. But in the aggregate, across the country, such is the mismatch between supply and demand over many decades under successive governments, that it will take some time, even if we had high and sustained rates of house building of the kind that we hope the reforms we're making will secure, to see house prices drop. And we wouldn't want them to drop sharply. So I think the best scenario that we can expect is a sustained levelling off of house price growth and then a gradual easing of it over time. But because that is a sort of medium to long-term proposition, that is why it is so important to get that direct support in the form of social and affordable housing grant. That's what the £39 billion is for, so that we can make that immediate difference, if you like, for people on low incomes for whom can't buy private market sale homes, to make that difference up front. But our analysis, in broad terms, Chair, if it helps, estimates that a 1% increase in housing stock should, all else being equal, decrease prices by 2%. That is a general rule of thumb. But as I said, the mismatch in supply and demand over many, many years is such that will take a long time to bend the curve.
And do we expect that to significantly increase affordability for the young people who really need to get that step onto the housing ladder soon, if possible?
Well, there's a couple of things I bring Mel in to add to what I'm saying, but have already started to see improvements in the number of first-time buyer mortgages. They've picked up by up to 329,000 in 2024. That's an increase of 16% on the previous year. And the house price to earnings ratio, again, is coming down in a helpful way. So there's some positive signs about things improving. There's more we need to do on that side.
Yeah, so to add, we obviously one of the things we track is the prices to earnings ratios, and that has slightly improved in recent time, but obviously we're supplementing that through changes on the mortgages side, shared ownership and other interventions to drive that further. But it is something, these are big structural changes that do take time to work through.
I think just lastly, Minister, one of the obvious other issues with regards to some of the Help to Buys, 95% interest rates, loans, is obviously people falling into negative equity. That could be a big issue, especially for first-time buyers. Is there a risk, and what will the government do to address that if we see that pattern coming forward?
I'm happy to address that. I mean, I think so. There are plenty of safeguards in place to make sure that lenders have to act in consumers' best interest, not least the consumer duty. But that's also the flow limit is really important here. So, and the piece of work that's been going on by the PRA and the PRA, the FPC and the FCA stuff as well. So there are plenty of safeguards in this area, but this all links back, Chair, to the previous point that was being made about affordability. Because of course what we have seen is that house prices gradually rising and very tight mortgage regulation, which has meant that far too many people have been squeezed out of the housing market, particularly the younger generation. So the changes that are being made to mortgage rules across the piece make sure that there are a greater variety of mortgage products available, and we're seeing some really good innovation in this area. But importantly, mortgages are becoming more affordable. And this is, part of what is driving the fact of housing becoming more affordable as well. And Minister Pennycook rightly referred to the house price to earnings ratio. For first-time buyers, this is lower than the 20-year average at the moment, according to the latest figures from Nationwide. So things are heading in the right direction for the purposes of more first-time buyers getting on the ladder.
More affordable. So an average first-time buyer in my constituency would need a minimum of around £100,000 for a deposit. In what way is that more affordable, Minister?
So, I mean, clearly there are different, there's variation in different areas of the country, and not least because house prices are different in different areas of the country. And indeed, what constitutes affordability is is a sort of, something which is disputed, or indeed there are different measures of that. And there's also obviously a difference between mortgage affordability and housing affordability as well. But on housing affordability, as I said, the moves are going in the right direction in that regard. In sort of a most basic definition of affordability, I would suggest fundamentally what we're talking about, and I suspect many on the committee would agree, fundamentally what we're talking about is people on typical incomes being able to secure a decent home. That's basically it. Are we where we need to be yet? I would argue no. But, Chair, the point I'm making is that things are heading in the right direction because of the changes that we're making, both to supply, which is obviously predominantly the purview of Minister Pennycook, but then also in relation to demand and both mortgage affordability and housing affordability.
We'll come back to that.
Just a very quick question, Minister. We are now in an era where a lot of the people that would normally be expecting to buy their first home are also repaying their Plan 2 loans, often at quite high rates. Has the student loans, has the department looked at what impact the student loan system is having on affordability for people buying their first time homes in this period?
I think it's a very good question, if I might say so. Not that I have come across, but I might turn to Alanna.
I don't think there's any specific analysis on that point, but in general, if people have less disposable income after they've paid various charges, then they will have less money available to contribute towards mortgage affordability.
Minister, if we were to write to you, is that something that the Treasury would look at on the back of Chris's point?
I think it's a very good question, so yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Pennycook, you mentioned the impact of new homes and supply bringing down prices. Could you comment on how many homes you think would need to be built in order for that to happen, for that to start taking an effect? Can you quantify that, not necessarily down to the single home, but quantify where you think that tips the balance into more affordability?
Well, I think there's a short-term localised impact depending on how many homes are built in a particular housing market area. But in aggregate, the best analysis we have is departmental analysis based on academic research that estimates, as I said, a 1% increase in housing stock should all else being equal, decrease prices by 2%. But when you look at why, and Minister Rigby touched on this, what has driven the worsening of affordability for first-time buyers over the last few decades, it's incredibly complex, but there's broadly two main drivers. One, as a country, we have failed pretty miserably, actually, to build enough homes of all tenures to meet housing demand. And second, and overlaying that, the financialisation of housing has exacerbated that inadequate lack of supply. So over recent decades, homes have become an investment product. They've reorientated the market away from local people looking for a home to live towards second home owners, buy-to-let landlords and foreign investors seeking a safe and stable repository for their wealth. And that generally has inflated prices, rents to historic highs, rising faster than wages, and to an extent fueled speculation for land and housing, and has driven inequalities between different parts of the country but between generations, such as we're seeing. I think Mr. Curtis mentioned it, but for young people in particular, a real inability to get on the housing ladder, and that is feeding through society. We get it all in our postbags in very various ways. Lots of people living at home with parents well into their 20s, sometimes 30s.
So talking about moving now to the sort of mechanics around builders, developers, what do you think we need to sort of get things going a bit more, so it is a little bit slow?
In general housing supply terms,
the government's role in trying to get the mechanics going.
First, we need a planning system that facilitates enough new homes coming forward. That is partly related to the amount of land we release into the system, but also about how the planning system works and the extent to which it's streamlined and effective and provides for timely outcomes. The changes we made to the National Planning Policy Framework to address that, I think, are already having an impact. We're seeing that anecdotally, and it will start to come through more in a more pronounced way in the statistics as time goes by due to the nature of the development cycle. But making more land available into the system, putting in place a new standard method that is more linked to our 1.5 target overall, which is based on a housing stock baseline with an affordability ratchet, again targeting the areas of most acute affordability challenge across the country, deliberately to do that. But we've always been clear, I think I was clear in the Financial Times article that the chair referenced, planning reform alone won't boost housing supply. And where we are going to turn quite pronouncedly over the coming months, although we've been doing lots of work on it before, is what more do we need to do to reform the housing system, the market, to transform the business models of some of the big players where we can, by encouraging things like partnership working, more mixed-use sites that are large in scale. How do we get new entrants into the market? We've got a lot of focus over recent months and in the recent MPPF changes about what more we can do to bring small and medium-sized house builders to arrest their decline but allow them to thrive over the years ahead, council house building. So there'd be a big drive towards delivery and market reform.
On the council housing one, what is the role for local authorities to speed things up a bit, given that we're already nearly 2 years into the Parliament?
So we've taken a number of steps through the changes we made to the planning system to try to modernise the way local planning authorities operate. I recognise some of the people here were very much involved in the debates on the Planning and Infrastructure Act, for example, but the way we are modernising planning committees with a new national scheme of delegation to ensure there's more certainty in the system. All of these will, along with other reforms we're contemplating, shrink the timelines to make planning decisions. But I'd say, as well as that, councils have a role as direct providers of housing. We know that councils, due to a variety of reasons, have not been building at the scale that is required. We've never essentially met housing need since local authority supply dropped off a cliff in the previous century. But we are doing lots more to reinvigorate council house building. It's all set out in our 5-step plan. But as well as allowing them to draw on that 39 billion pot of grant funding, we've allocated 9 million to 44 councils through the Council House Building Support Fund, help them accelerate and increase the size of their bids into that grant fund. We're putting a lot of other steps in place.
9 million out of 39 billion is quite a small quantum.
Separate pot.
Right.
Still
a small number compared to 39 billion.
But it's support to allow those councils, it's just a support fund to help them bid into that 39 billion pound pot. We've sustained the Public Works Loan Board rates for another year. We're allowing councils to benefit from the rent convergence policy we've just announced. So there's a variety of ways in which we can get councils back on the pitch in a serious way, but it's from a very low base, so it's going to take some time.
Thank you, Minister. Luke.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Pennycook, you mentioned your Financial Times interview in which you've just alluded to it, where you criticised the current business model of the housing developers. You said it does constrain supply because they can't afford to build and sell homes too quickly. I wonder if you wanted to expand on that point. How much of a problem is their business model, and how do you ensure that they continue to build while doing the things that you need to do to change it?
I want to be really clear, because it's a systemic problem rather than the result of bad behaviour on the part of any individual developer. Developers, particularly the volume house builders, are acting entirely rationally within the framework in which they operate, in which land is inherently constrained. I mean, this is at the root of lots of problems, which is why through the MPPF we're allowing more land to be made available through the system. But we are overly reliant on a speculative model of house building that operates on the basis of developers acquiring land, most often these days from a hugely expanded land promotion sector. Lots of land across the country is already optioned, but in the expectation that they'll secure planning permission, cover all their costs, make a return on the basis of house prices as currently constituted and largely set by the second-hand market. So developers under that model can't build too fast, or it will affect their margins. And that is an inherent constraint. I think it leads to bad outcomes in some instances, but it's also an inherent constraint on supply. And lots of studies have attested to this. The Letwin review is very, very clear on this. This market absorption rate problem is one of the binding constraints in the housing market. The way that we get around that is partly through transformation, but partly through market reform, as I've touched on. We need to encourage more mixed-use development on larger sites. We made changes in the NPPF to try and focus on that approach above sites above 150 units. We've put money behind a project called Hestia, which is a Homes England joint partnership with Vistry, which is, again, a partnership model that relies on a type of delivery where there is more affordable being delivered up front to build the site out quicker, because the more affordable you get into a site, the quicker it builds. There's inelastic demand for social and affordable homes in the way that first-time buyers. But we also need to diversify the house building industry. That's where SMEs, councils, getting more players on the pitch that build in different ways, don't face those constraints, will help us. So we need, I suppose in really simple terms, the volumes to do what they do, and in greater numbers, and to open more outlets. We need some of them to contemplate a slightly different business model, hopefully working in partnership that gets more affordable and quicker build out, and then all of those different entrants coming through, more diversified and healthy house building system.
Thank you. One of the issues they raise is the absence of what they say is a first-time buyer scheme for the first time in 60 years. How much do you think that is true, and what is the rationale for not having one? Is it that because you believe it will feed into higher prices? What's the rationale for not having one?
Quite simply, the previous government schemes ended. We are, as a department, doing a full evaluation of what previous rounds of Help to Buy meant in terms of outcomes, both in terms of supply, price impact. Lots of the studies, and Mel can provide some really useful detail on this. Lots of the studies that have taken place don't really provide us a huge amount of insight as to what were the outcomes of that product. But we'll have live discussions across government about what more is needed on the demand side. We've already put in place, Minister Rigby can touch more on this, but a permanent mortgage guarantee scheme. Lots of the tax changes we're making are having a really positive impact for first-time buyers. Again, to that point I made about the financialisation of housing, shifting the focus away from investors and second homeowners towards first-time buyers. So we are doing things in this space, but we have no current plans, just to be really clear, for a sort of replacement Help to Buy scheme, an equity loan scheme. But we'll continue to have those discussions. The house builders are very clear that they want to see a demand-side stimulus.
Just want to bring Bob in, then Will.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on the point you made about how we've never really built at scale without the support of local authorities building directly. And I wonder if you could help me out. I just want to step back a bit, because it seems like if you look at it from a whole state perspective, the maths is very clear. Say it costs, and I'm making these figures up, 250 grand to build a small family home, and you're going to get the rental income over 50 years. It pays for itself. Once you take into account housing benefit going out from the DWP as well, the maths gets even simpler. So it seems like from a whole Treasury perspective that allowing local authorities to borrow to build is no-brainer, but the housing revenue account system isn't delivering on that front. So I wondered, Ms. Rigby, do you do that kind of whole state perspective when calculating how much you're allowing local government to borrow to build?
So again, a good question. I'm afraid I wasn't involved in the last bit of the spending review, but I'm going to turn to my official.
Apologies, but I didn't emphasise the last bit of the spending review either because of where I sit within the Treasury. But perhaps we can follow up.
But do you take it? So obviously the money comes out of the state via housing benefits to private landlords at the moment at scale. If you take into account that plus the rental income you could receive from a social housing tenant, does that get taken into consideration when you're thinking about how much capacity local authorities should have to borrow to be able to build more social homes, looking over the long run?
In the absence of any other answer, I would imagine it does, but I suspect it's probably the best thing, Mr. Dean, if we write to you to confirm exactly how it is taken into account.
Mr. Pennycook, you got any views?
I just say I think I've already mentioned them, but we have made a series of changes that do make it easier for councils to build. We actually have made recent announcements in relation to the housing revenue account, including raising the threshold from 200 to 1,000 at which local authorities can take on those responsibilities. There are fiscal implications of more fundamental changes to the HRA. There are, as I said, we keep these issues under review, but whether through rent convergence, through that stable 10-year rent settlement, CPI plus 1%, giving local authorities that certainty, and a series of other interventions, we are making it easier for councils to build again. I suppose I'd just re-emphasise the point that the numbers coming through are so small at the moment that it a sort of really significant
Is that
jump in the
because of the
numbers.
fiscal point you just mentioned? So obviously the interest often comes out of the day-to-day revenue expenditure of a local authority, and so because a lot of them are carrying deficits in their HRA because of all the increases in maintenance, building safety, etc. Is that what's holding back the existing debts? Does the government need to come and intervene to do something about that?
There are real challenges with the HRA and really significant, quite acute challenges in certain parts of the country when it comes to individual local authorities. We think the self-financing model is the right one. We don't intend to change that, but there are certainly pressures there. As I said, wider changes have fiscal implications. We think we've given councils enough of what they need to start to begin at scale again. But I would say that it's not just a financial resource question. There's now a deficit of skills, which is why, again, we've put in place this 9 million, which is pretty significant, I would say, in terms of direct local authority support for this particular task. But there's a whole skill set that was in place in local authorities. Members of the committee will know that local authorities used to have their own architects, etc., that just isn't there now. So the scaling up of local authority house building is a real challenge, but I think we've put in place some of the things we need to do to start turning that corner. And alongside other providers being supported in the market, SMEs in particular, we can get that diversity of supply coming through.
Just on that point, Mr. Pennycook, there are some councils, like Hackney Council and my own council, that are doing building council homes. But as you say, a lot of councils don't have architects departments or the skill set, the direct labour organisation, or the ability even to procure. Are you looking at encouraging councils to group together so that you have a lead council that's got this experience that could help hold the hand of a council that wants to invest the money in developing council housing in its own area? Is that something that's on the cards?
We haven't directly instructed them or encouraged them to do that. I am extremely interested in that model. I think that is a potential way to bring together the necessary skills and resources across our area and get the benefit of those economies of scale.
Well, they've all got that cue now from you. And Minister Rigby, in response to Mr Dean, you couldn't answer some of the detailed questions, but the Chancellor has been very clear that she wanted to borrow to invest in infrastructure. Mm-hmm. One of the best value for money bits of infrastructure is actually social housing. It's one of the best values, but according to MHCLG's own records, best value for money. So there's always a Treasury invest to save, spend to save is a bit of a challenge for the Treasury over the long term in some respects, just institutionally. But is this something that is being considered at all? Is it on your desk? If it's not on your desk, where else in the Treasury is this being talked about? Because if people have got a stable roof over their heads and an opportunity to live where they can work, that can be very good for the economy.
I mean, Chair, I would agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. It's not on my desk. The bits of this that sit on my desk are in relation to financial services, so everything around mortgages. But then, as I also alluded to earlier, the piece around helping consumers save for a deposit. But yes, the fact of clearly investment, indeed in all forms of infrastructure, is very clearly something that sits in the Treasury.
Under the snuffle rules and so on that we've talked about on the Treasury Select Committee, was there or is there likely to be any discussion to allow councils to borrow more? I mean, obviously borrowing is high. We know there are challenges there, but is that a prospect?
Again, Jake, you'll forgive me, it's not directly within my portfolio. I didn't, subject to Alanna saying something. We'll add that to the letter that we'll write to
I think it's just from my perspective, Chair, already mentioned that we have extended the preferential public works loan board borrowing rate for council house building. There's also a number of other changes that we made, some quite early on in our period of government, in cooperation with Treasury, which are having a real impact on council's ability to build. 100% retention of right to buy receipts, allowing councils to combine right to buy receipts with that £39 billion grant funding. All of these things are pretty transformative in terms of what councils could do, and those wider changes we're making to right to buy. In particular, I'd say that 35-year prohibition on the sale of newly built social rented homes, that is hugely important when we speak to councils in terms of their willingness to build, knowing that those homes can't be immediately sold. Because we have seen across the country, I think it's an absolute travesty, newly built social rented homes immediately then sold to third-party investors, often to Mr Dean's point, then rented back to the local authority with housing benefit charged on it. So some of the certainty we're provided in types of other reforms to the right to buy, which we need to bring forward through primary legislation, again, will have a real impact.
Thank you.
If I might add on the point on the sort of whether the PSNUFL arrangements are helping, the National Housing Bank specifically has $2.5 billion for low interest rate loans to support RPs, which is an example of how we are using the flexibilities in the new fiscal framework to support cheaper lending essentially to the RPs so they can build social housing.
Okay.
Thank you, Florence. I've got a few questions, Ministers. So the first couple are for you, Matthew. Considering the government's commitment to build 1.5 million homes, how many homes are going to be need to built by the end of this Parliament to have a noticeable effect on affordability? And then to reach your target and then improve affordability, do we need local authorities to build homes? And if so, how many?
Mr Foster, you forgive me, but I feel like I've answered both of those questions already. We've set ourselves a 1.5 million new homes target. That is the target for this Parliament. We'd expect that to have positive impacts in terms of affordability. I hope I've been clear that we don't want a sugar rush of house building rates and then a huge drop-off. We've got to ensure that the rates are high and sustainable, and we think the reforms we're making will allow that. So we want to, and I'm absolutely confident we will, achieve what the previous government failed to hit that and get beyond that 300,000 home a year target that's been the target of many governments, but then sustain those rates over time, and that will have an impact on affordability. But there's more we need to do, particularly on the demand side and the distribution of homes. I've spoken about the impact of the financialisation of what second home owners, investors and others have done. Local authorities, I think we covered, if you've got a specific question, but I think we've covered quite extensively.
I think the specifics is, I think I and we are after numbers. So you said this is going to have an impact on affordability. Is it going to freeze affordable? Is it going to make prices frozen? Is it going to have a 1? Is it going to have a 10% reduction? What assessment has the department made on what it will be? And then from local authorities, what number do you need them to do?
Yeah. I've referenced twice now the analysis that the department has carried out as to what we expect, all things being equal, an increase of supply to do to house prices, but there are short-term and localised impacts as well. In terms of, I think you're driving at an affordable target for local areas. We expect local areas to set those targets in local plans. In our recent revised MPPF that we've out to consultation with, we've also explored and asked for feedback on, for example, setting a minimum proportion of social rent homes. But when it comes to an overall affordable target, the committee's pressed me on this a number of times. We haven't set one. We will have, to Ms Baldwin and other members' questions earlier, we'll have a very clear idea once the new social and affordable homes programme opens for bids, the expected number to come through that grant funding rate. Affordable homes coming through the other channel, which is developer contributions, is much more highly dependent on what Section 106 agreements are negotiated and put in place on every individual housing site across the country. But we expect local authorities to be setting the tenure breakdown and the home, to meet their local housing needs. So it's primarily a question for local authorities in terms of what does their particular local housing market require.
And I suppose a question for both ministers, following on from my colleague Bobby Dean's questions about the HRA. Minister Rigby, you're not. You said you're not aware of that detail. I suppose that highlights to me. Do you think Public Works Loan Board and monitoring of HRA should be transferred fully to MHCLG to ensure that that department can fully own and encourage house building? And can you explain why the discounted rate of HRA borrowing has been extended only for 1 year when we know how helpful that will be at building social homes?
Certainly from my point of view, I'm afraid it's not indicative of anything other than this sits within the Chief Secretary to the Treasury's portfolio rather than my own. But as I said, I am more than happy to write to Mr Dean and indeed to cover off Dame Meg's question as well.
And we'll set out the position for future years at the appropriate point, but I well understand the point about local authorities needing as much certainty as possible.
Obviously, I think you said we need certainty, or councils need certainty to borrow, but we've done our offer. That doesn't help them plan, and that does suppress their ability to deliver social affordable homes, when would you decide to extend that HRA discount rate?
We've just announced the extension to March 2027. Any further announcements, you'll forgive me, will be made to Parliament in the usual way.
Thank you. Housing mix. Bobby. You've done that. Thank you. Sean. Retrofitting.
Going back to affordability, there's a slight difference between what the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, says about affordable, in that it should be less than 5 times local earning, but also what the National Planning Policy Framework says, as in it should be 20% below market rate. I just wonder if you could talk to why that is, why the NPPF has that difference with the Office for National Statistics version of affordable.
If I've understood you correctly, there's two separate and distinct issues we're talking about here. General house price affordability, which the ONS track, which the OBR have said they expect to broadly track incomes, and then affordable housing as defined in the glossary of the NPPF, which encompasses a range of different products. Affordable rent, 80% of up to 80% of submarket is one type of product that may be suitable for some areas. I suppose our focus has been as a government on ensuring that we get a significant uptick in the most affordable type of affordable housing, which is social rented homes. That is why 60% of the £39 billion new programme is directly targeted at that type of tenure.
I suppose my challenge is that the word affordable comes up whenever you'll be door knocking, I'll be door knocking, speaking to people, and the challenge is often that we're not building homes that are actually affordable, and that's linked to that sort of question. So when councils are responding and coming up with their local plans based on the NPPF, there does seem a sort of distinction there. Would it not make sense to sort of look at how affordable is being defined in the NPPF so that it is more linked to that ONS sort of definition? Do you have any intention of doing that, or do you not sort of see there would be merit to sort of doing that?
We did revise how affordable housing is defined in the NPPF glossary, specifically distinguishing between social rent as a particular type and the most affordable type of product and other types of affordable housing. But ultimately it's for local planning authorities to say, through their local plans and then on an individual site basis through Section 106 negotiations, what type of affordable homes they want to see and need to see come through to meet housing demand, housing need in their particular areas. And then to the extent that they need, for example, a significant proportion of social rent, I'm assuming that there's a council housing waiting list in your particular part of the country, as there is in mine, many tens of thousands of people on the Royal Borough of Greenwich's housing waiting list. But again, that's where the £39 billion grant funding pot comes in, which councils as well as housing associations can bid into.
I'm going to bring in Sarah, then I'll come to you, Chris.
Thank you. Minister Pennycook, so there are an estimated, I think, 265,000-ish empty homes that have been empty for maybe more than 6 months. And certainly there is nothing more frustrating to a street than that empty property that kind of brings the whole street down and potentially turns into more than one. I'm sure we've all had casework on those types of really frustrating situations. So I was just interested to understand, what are you doing to look at the viability and reducing the risk for councils to take on those empty homes and renovate them for social housing?
It's a really good point, and I think I often get challenged occasionally by people who don't want to see house building in their area, that we don't need to build any more houses because empty homes will resolve the issue. I just want to be very clear. We think bringing more empty homes back into use can make an important contribution to the housing crisis we're facing across the country. It's not a panacea. As of September 2025, there's 542,000 empty homes. Of these, just over 300,000 have been empty for 6 months or more. In terms of what tools are available, local authorities already have strong powers and incentives to tackle empty homes. They've discretionary powers to charge additional council tax on properties which have been left unoccupied and substantially unfurnished for 1 or more years. They can also access funding through the Affordable Homes Programme and the Local Authority Housing Fund. They have CPO powers, But we are looking, and we made very clear as part of the English devolution white paper, that we do want to strengthen local authorities' ability to take over the management of vacant residential properties, because we think there's more they can do. But I suppose as alongside us looking at what more powers local authorities need, I'm keen to test, because I when honourable members often ask me this, challenge them, and I think there's a degree of which councils being either unaware or unwilling or unable, perhaps it's a resource issue, to use the existing powers they have, and obviously want to ensure that they are maximising those existing powers before we introduce others. But I think we have recognised there's a case for looking at how we need to strengthen those to bring those back into use, because as you say, they're not only a blight on communities, but they could be meeting housing needs in important ways.
I think specifically one area is the onus that is on councils to prove that they are empty, and how high that is, and how challenging it can be to get over that threshold. So whether that's something that will be considered in this consultation in terms of what you can change to make it easier, notwithstanding the resource challenges some councils might have, for that to be done going forward.
Yeah. If the committee has any specific suggestions, proposals in this area, I'd very much welcome them. It's a live issue. As I said, we are looking at what more we can do to strengthen local authority.
I'm sure we'll come back to you on that one as we progress with the inquiry. For Minister Rigby, the budget promised a consultation on reforming VAT to incentivise land development for social housing, but will the Treasury expand its VAT consultation to include equalising the tax treatment of retrofitting and new builds, as has been called for by the Environmental Audit Committee?
I'm not aware that we have any plans to, but indeed I can follow up. One of the tax points actually which I wanted to interject in relation to what Minister Pennycook was saying earlier, though, which I think is important, is the incentivisation of. So Minister Pennycook was talking about when new properties are built, they get hoovered up. Other than by first-time buyers. So one of the changes that we made, as you'll know, at Budget 24, was to up the higher dwellings rate of SDLT by 2 percentage points. And at the most recent budget, we're also introducing this a new income tax on property income, both of which measures, more so the former, help to help the position of first-time buyers relative to landlords, which I think is an important point. I didn't want to interrupt what Matt was saying earlier, but just to get that one on the record.
Thank you. I think we would definitely urge or be helpful to write to us as to whether there is any consideration of that VAT review, and if not now, would it be in the future, given the importance or the opportunity around tackling, although maybe it's a small number, it still is a significant issue, I think, within communities, whether these sit empty or not. And back to you, Minister Pennycook. Has the department assessed the scale of residential property accumulation by foreign investors and the specific impact that's having on housing affordability?
I'll pass to Mel on the scale.
Yeah, so I'm not aware that there is very good data sources on that. What we do, so we have kind of market analysts who will kind of look at the key investors and try and understand the picture. I think there is a difference between institutional investment that is supporting kind of, normal families being able to access housing, which we support and is part of our objectives, versus the sort of ownership of properties that are not being used as dwellings, essentially, just as an investment product. And so we do a bit of monitoring of that, but as I've seen, there is not a kind of consistent data source that gives you a good picture, rather than essentially monitoring based on individual investors that we do on a kind of ongoing basis.
And what would either of the Minister's message be to those sort of speculative investors who might be sitting on empty homes because they just depend on the return on the capital value? Is there any message you would deliver to those types of particularly foreign investors at this time?
Well, I think in general the government wants to see more empty homes brought back into use across the country. It's a very clear and simple message. Mm-hmm. I would draw attention to, as Minister Rigby has said, some of the tax changes which are rebalancing the market away from investors of all kinds and towards more families looking to buy. And we know that is having an impact on first-time buyers, already quite a significant impact.
And just to add to that, and one point I should have mentioned is the added SDLT for non-UK residents as well. So there is an additional point there.
So it's worth saying, for example, in the measure around overseas investors in relation to stamp duty, the Treasury's estimate was that helped 130,000 additional transactions for first-time buyers. So these interventions can be really powerful for tipping the balance in favour of first-time buyers.
I think Mr. Curtis was.
Just a very quick one. Just jumping back on the point on social housing mix, Minister Pennycook, because you made the point, you can spend those S106 contributions, or all of the contributions that you've got for social housing, on a smaller number of units with more subsidy, or a larger number of units of less subsidy. And it sounds like your push is, you wouldn't quite frame it this way, a smaller number of units with social rent with a bigger subsidy. Why have you concluded that that is the better use of money?
Because social rented homes are the most affordable type of homes, and there is an acute and pressing need for those homes, not least to provide stable and secure homes for the many families who now live in temporary accommodation, for whom other affordable tenures would not be affordable. And again, I think we can go over the reasons why we saw that decline, but we have failed quite singularly to build enough genuinely affordable social rented homes over recent years. We want to get to a point where we are net positive in the supply of social homes, and that continues to see that boost, because it has a number of other impacts that are beneficial on the housing market. We might touch on the PRS, private rented sector, but in broad terms, we want to grow the supply of homes of all tenures. But there is a chunk of people at the top of the private rented sector who really should be, with the right conditions and support, be able to move into home ownership. And there is a cohort at the bottom end of the private rented sector who really should be in social rented homes, but there hasn't been enough supply coming through.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister Rigby, I want to talk a bit about mortgages. Obviously, the FCA has loosened the rules on mortgage lending, but that's made mortgages more accessible. Have you got any indication of how that's having an impact on purchasers?
Yes, as Minister Pennycook noted earlier, we have seen over the course of the last year more first-time buyers getting on the
That's first-time buyers,
ladder.
Yeah. So,
yes,
have you analysed it across the rest of the market?
57,000 year on year to the time period that Minister Pennycook mentioned. Yes, and so the FCA relaxing their rules following the mortgage review, 85% of the market have now adopted where the FCA suggests that they should be, and borrowers on average, I think it's now around about 10% more that they could borrow, which equates to about £30,000. Based on the looking back on the same income, but that's not the only piece of.
Sorry, £30,000 is the average across England, or
it is.
So I'm not sure. An average buyer across the UK is
across the UK as a whole. Okay,
yeah.
So that's the average. So that's an average. Obviously, there are other parts of. I mean, I represent an inner city London seat. A number of us around the table represent expensive areas, where it would be much more than £30,000 you'd need to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. It's 10% for a borrower, so on the same income. So a borrower who earned more would be able to borrow 10% more.
Okay, that's helpful. But this has made mortgages more accessible, but has it done anything about affordability? Because you can get more mortgage, but does that mean you're just over-indebting to buy the same property?
Well, because of what's happened to house prices, and indeed some more supply coming online, the fact of mortgages being more affordable, and indeed, in addition to what the FCA are doing, there's also the FPC's relaxation of the rules when it comes to the high loan-to-value lending or the flow limit. So I think as a package, we are seeing, I referred to the nationwide measure earlier of earnings to value, we are seeing houses becoming more affordable. But to the Chair's point earlier, there is further to go.
And are you doing any analysis of the length of mortgage terms? People who have young couples with 37-year mortgages, 40 or 40-year long mortgages. Is that something the Treasury is analysing?
I'm going to turn to
So it has been trending upwards over the last few years. Somewhere in here I've got the latest, but it's been sort of trending up about a 6 months increase every couple of years as in terms of length of term. I think it's in the region of about 31-year average at the moment, but I would need to double check.
That's an average, but have you done any analysis of new purchasers and whether their mortgage terms are significantly higher than people perhaps already on the ladder or people who were doing this 10 or 20 years ago?
Yes, sorry. So that was first-time buyers' average terms are trending upwards. So new buyers are tending to borrow over longer terms.
Minister, is there any analysis in the Treasury of the long-term public policy impact of that? That you've got people who will be indebted longer, but sometimes indeed if they're only buying in their 30s into retirement. Is that something that the Treasury is looking at in order to make sure that we're guarding against any unintended consequences in the future? Ms. Barber.
Certainly the FCA are looking at that as part of their discussion paper that they published their response last year about what they're going to be looking at, but they are looking at lending into retirement, both sort of retirement product but also impact of long-term.
That wasn't quite my question. It's people who are borrowing now on their income for over a 40-year period, and so we'll still have those extant mortgages potentially into retirement. Is it something that the Treasury, Ms. Rigby, is looking at in terms of the various support that the state should be providing? Because it's not just about your portfolio and those financial services products, it's also the impact on people's incomes into retirement and their ability to have will be able to live off their pension.
No, sorry, Chair, I understand the question. Not that I'm aware of, no.
Is it something you might want to take away and think about?
I think in addition to some of the other things that have been raised, yes. I mean, I have thought about it from the point of view of very long-term mortgages, which I understand are more available in jurisdictions like the US, or more common, I should say. They are, as you know, available in this country, but as to sort of the long-term impact on financial health, I'm not aware of work which is currently ongoing.
My point, I think, is really that you can get people can buy homes with easier mortgages, but does that mean it's actually affordable for them? So thank you for taking that away. And I want to touch on the mortgage guarantee scheme.
Yes.
My simple question is, why bother, given that there are now even, I think Santander's got a 98% loan to value offer, many others have 95% loan to value offers, so why is the Treasury bothering with a mortgage guarantee scheme?
I think because
I should just stress, of course, you made it permanent after an experiment or a temporary pilot by the previous government.
We did, yeah. We've recently made it permanent, or in July, halfway through last year. I mean, the thinking behind that, of course, and where the mortgage guarantee scheme becomes useful is in the event of a slowdown, an economic slowdown, where we've seen that lenders take high loan-to-value products off the market. So that is when a mortgage guarantee scheme becomes useful, because it keeps those kind of products in the market. Now, you rightly say that we're not in that position at the moment, and indeed we are seeing greater innovation in the mortgage market, and indeed you mentioned Santander and other providers as well, bringing lower deposit products to market, which is a good thing. And in those circumstances, an MGS is less useful. But I come back to the point, it is in the event of a slowdown, it will enable lenders to keep low deposit or lower deposit products on the market.
What's the contingent liability that the Treasury is carrying on the mortgage guarantee scheme over this Parliament?
Gosh, as to an exact figure, I'm not sure.
Or in the ballpark, if we can't give an exact figure, I expect you could write.
I think so. It's important to say that where lenders do become part of the mortgage guarantee scheme, it's not each mortgage is sort of is subject to the same affordability assessments and everything else. So this isn't. This
I like to crystallise, you think?
Well, my point is just that this isn't such as to mean that there are very, very risky loans being made, because everyone is still subject to the same affordability criteria.
You think the chance, not chance of it crystallising that contingent? I mean, contingent liabilities are normal to see, but you think the risk of crystallisation is limited?
Well, you've obviously
it is,
the intention is to keep it as low as you possibly can, because as I said, with the affordability assessments that still apply. But to answer your question directly, I don't have an exact figure for the side of that liability.
If you could supply both our committees with you'll have written, no doubt, the Chair of the Public Accounts Committee about this, so perhaps Ms Barber could take that back and make sure that we could see the same. Maybe the Chair did see it, I didn't, but if we could see that contingent liability, that would be helpful. And then the other challenge here is that you've got this mortgage guarantee scheme, but it doesn't apply to a lot of private leasehold flats, and they are the new builds that are going up in a lot of inner city areas in particular. Why is that, and is that something you're going to consider changing?
So the mortgage guarantee scheme can be used on new build flats.
It's at a lower rate, isn't it, I think?
Not the mortgage guarantee scheme, no. It can be used at 95% new build flats.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was not the understanding and comments that we heard when we had Pocket Living at one of our evidence sessions. They mentioned that no lender is providing that for new build flats. So are you now saying that the new scheme that government is offering will be applicable to new build flats?
So it's true that not very many lenders lend at 95% on new build flats. I believe Santander, as one of the major lenders, does, but it's true that many of them don't, and they will only lend at lower loan to values on those flats. However, the mortgage guarantee scheme, if lenders are part of the mortgage guarantee scheme and they choose to lend on a new build flat, it applies to new build flats as well.
It's if they choose to lend, not that they have to lend.
Yes, so we don't prescribe what properties or what borrowers lenders must lend to, but the mortgage guarantee scheme can.
Are you concerned that maybe that there's a reluctance on new build flats to lend at the 95% rate? And if that is the case, how are you going to assess whether the mortgage guarantee scheme is working? Because it would surely then increase the chance of a 95% loan-to-value rate or higher loan-to-value rate on leasehold flats.
So I think, as the Minister said, the sort of market failure that the mortgage guarantee scheme is trying to address is an absence of 95% products in the market, so that borrowers can borrow at 95% rather than make it particularly easier for a given property or a given borrower, if that makes sense. So it's more that those products exist and there is borrowing at 95% available on new build flats.
It seems that maybe there's dead weight here, that you've got a guarantee scheme where they're already being provided. I hear what the Minister says about future scenarios, but where we have a situation in many of our constituencies where the properties are blocks of flats, often leasehold, there's a reluctance to lend at the higher loan-to-value rates. Clearly, the mortgage guarantee scheme, if that's not happening, isn't working for those. And have you got any metrics then to measure whether the mortgage guarantee scheme will encourage higher loan-to-value ratios on those sorts of properties?
I don't think we've got metrics on that. As I say, we're aiming at...
Not collecting data on how the mortgage guarantee scheme is working.
No, so we're certainly collecting data on mortgages completed through the scheme, but...
and that by type of property as well as by just...
I'll have to take that away. But I think the purpose of the guarantee scheme isn't so much to encourage lending on new build flats as to encourage 95% product availability.
Well, I think it was work we may want to dig into further there, Chair. Thank you very much for now, Ms Barber. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just moving on, Minister Pennycook, obviously a big issue that we've raised with you on many occasions around shared ownership. You'll know some of the issues around staircasing, around selling on the properties. Does the Ministry have any proposals in terms of endorsing the shared ownership code?
The code, we're supportive of the code as an industry-led initiative. I recently met with the council and Santry to discuss it, so very supportive of that as an industry-led initiative. We are, as a government, also making changes through the new social and affordable homes programme to improve the consumer experience of shared ownership, to strengthen expectations on landlords, including clearer, more accessible upfront information for prospective buyers, greater consideration of long-term affordability, and improved transparency and fairness in terms of how rents, service charges and other fees are set. And then shared owners will also benefit. We may come onto it as a topic in its own right, but from the wider reforms to the leasehold system we're making.
I think there's a lot of concern across many members of shared owners feeling that the the code currently lacks any meaningful teeth without government endorsing it, and essentially we know that the Housing Ombudsman is very supportive as well. So there's a difference in terms of being supporting or formally endorsing it and saying, yes, this is something that you'd want to see enacted.
I understand there is a difference, yeah. We remain at present supportive of it as an industry initiative. We haven't formally endorsed the code.
Just in terms of...
Sorry, no, I don't want to interrupt you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the shared ownership model, what thoughts you had on perhaps decreasing the proportion that somebody is required to buy, whether this might be a change that could allow more people to step into home ownership.
Affordability.
I'll bring Mel in on this after me. I think, individuals under this product, which we've said should have an ongoing role through the Social and Affordable Homes Programme, allows people to buy a share of their property from between 10 and 75%. We're trying to bring certainty to the subsidised rent portion of it through the improvements we're making, bringing all new leases from October 2023 under that new CPI +1 cap, again on that side. But I think, Chair, and it speaks to the Chair's point as well, I think it's a particular issue for London members, and I face this in my own constituency. We have seen across the country shared ownership working incredibly effectively, and in some parts of the country it being more problematic tenure with shared owners facing different challenges. So there seems to me, on all the basis of the evidence we've got and the department's collected, some real regional discrepancies in terms of the consumer experience, if you like. But I might bring Mel in on the particular issue you raise about whether I take it to mean government should mandate a lower share.
I think our speaking to shared owners and providers, our sense is that the 10% entry point does provide the affordability. Some of the issues have been around the service charges and the fees that come alongside that. So our focus has been on, as Minister Pennycook has alluded to, through the Social and Affordable Homes Programme guidance and the prospectus, and there'll be more work to do on that, making sure that there is more fairness and more affordability in those fees and charges, which hopefully will allow the combination of the 10% and more affordable, reasonable fees and charges to mean people can enter the product.
And most of the problems seem to me to be around the whole issue of leasehold flats in London. So whether it's shared ownership or whether it's outright home ownership, the issues of service charges, management, all the rest of it runs across that whole type of property. So I just wondered, back in the day, there was a notion of portable shared ownership, where you could identify an ordinary house in an ordinary street and possibly get shared ownership. Given the demand that lots of council face for family size accommodation, would that be something that you would consider? Because with that bit of help, there are families who could get on their first step of home ownership via portable discount and buying a house.
So my understanding of that product was that was a more market and private market product where people were provided a bit of a subsidy. I think that was the predecessor to what then became equity loan products, which obviously are not currently within the government's portfolio of products that it's providing, but that's less focused on new supply is my recollection of the product. And obviously, given the importance of building new homes, it feels right that our subsidy is going into new homes and affordable homes. But Matt, you might have...
The affordability pressures that shared owners face are broadly high staircasing and resale fees, which we're trying to get at through improvements to the Social and Affordable Homes Programme, and then high and rising service charges, which through a separate stream of activity, as you know, we're trying to, through bringing into force the measures in the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act 2024, standardise and increase transparency of service charges. And the committee is obviously looking at the draft bill and will no doubt come forward with suggestions on service charges in managing agents in due course. Very many, I expect.
sorry, Chair. So many hobby horses I'm able to try out here. Given the reduction in the discount under right to buy, for all the reasons that you've described, there was a product which was I'm trying to remember the title of it, where if somebody left their social housing unit to buy, they would get...
Rent to buy?
No, it wasn't rent to buy. It was something like portable discount, where you could, if that helped you to buy, you could buy in the private sector, releasing the social housing unit. So helped a family to get on the ladder, had the available property for somebody else in need. And obviously you would bend it towards the larger properties, which is what you were really looking for. So it allowed maybe the type of family who wanted to move to the coast, wanted to move to another part of the country where house prices were far less and where they had family or work. It was a kind of win-win opportunity.
Yeah. At the risk of misleading the committee, if the committee wants to write to me about a particular product, I'm happy to give the government's position on it. But in terms of what the Social and Affordable Homes Programme will support, both in terms of sub-market rent and low-cost home ownership, that is all set out in the prospectuses. So I don't think it sounds like we have... I mean, rent-to-buy products, you can still be financed. But I'd have to have clarity on what the exact product is we're talking about.
Lee, very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Just to Minister Pennycook, to both on shared ownership, and Matthew, you just alluded to it there in terms of when people are staircasing, they have those additional costs. Often one of those costs is having the property revalued each time you go to staircase. But I'm aware Newbury Building Society actually take a pragmatic view on that, and they put a value themselves internally on that property and back themselves, which then reduces the need to have that survey. Would that be something that you would encourage other building societies and lenders to have a look at that approach to see if it could work for their organisation, so it reduces that cost for individual shareholders?
So broadly, I think the changes we're introducing to the shared ownership model through the Social and Affordable Homes Programme, I'd encourage all providers to look at those and to roll them out as far as they possibly can. With staircasing specifically, we recognise that can be complex, costly. It involves valuations and other fees that accrue with it. That's why we're reforming the shared ownership model, as I said, to provide for that greater flexibility, including smaller staircasing increments, because we do recognise the pressure. Yeah.
But that's potentially more valuations. If you're doing smaller staircasing increments, to get that extra 10%, you're stepping through it 5 different times at 2% a time, which might then need a revaluation every 2%.
I take the point. I suppose for the time being, because we need to flesh out more detail on this, again, and I encourage the committee if it's got suggestions, but we've broadly indicated the direction of travel through the Social and Affordable Homes Programme. We are thinking very carefully about what more can be done to improve the staircasing process and the wider customer experience.
And for the very small staircases, the sort of 1%, the need for evaluation has been removed, because often that was not cost effective, but we will continue to look at the options.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Could I turn to the lifetime ISA replacement? And I'd address my questions to Lucy, the Economic Secretary. Given that the government has committed in the budget last year to replace or refine the existing lifetime ISA, and given the latest UK house price index shows that the average price paid to a first-time buyer in London with a cost of a house is $477,000, and we've seen 35% increase in house prices since the launch of the product. What's the government's latest thinking on the cap for the lifetime ISA?
Just to go back, John, Mr. Glenn, to the sort of thinking behind this, as you may or may not acknowledge, I'm not sure, the LISA isn't working as well as it could. There's complexity sorry, this may well have been covered from the way that the chair is looking at me in the recent report that you did on the perhaps not. That it's not working as well as it could. And indeed, the fact of the stakeholders have criticised the withdrawal charge in particular for being poorly understood, which has led to suggestions of mis-selling. But in any event, because it's a dual purpose product, the thinking is that we need to have something more specific for first-time buyers. So we're going to consult at the beginning of this year on exactly what that product will look like. And I don't want to preempt, to your question directly, I don't want to preempt the parameters of that consultation, including in relation to the cap.
So I recognise the withdrawal penalties issue, but you're not prepared to say anything this morning on the cap, despite the clear evidence of what the average house price is in key areas like London. I mean, surely it's now irresistible. I mean, you increased, or the FSCS deposit limit increased to 120,000 just before Christmas, I think. That reflected inflationary increases over 10 years. So surely it's reasonable to assume that that is an imminent announcement of the government.
I think it's definitely right to suggest that we are aware of what is happening to house prices and indeed the utility of the current cap. But as I said, we will come forth with in the consultation with obviously all the parameters of the new product will be within the scope of that consultation.
Right. So can I just focus in on the withdrawal penalties? I believe that last year the Treasury took 75 million in withdrawal charges, which, I mean, I suppose effectively taxes the primary capital of young people. Now, I assume a government like this would want to do the progressive and fair thing. So could we expect that there would be perhaps a bonus-only penalty? Would that be a proposal that the Treasury would be looking at?
What we're looking to do, because I said acknowledging the way that the current product works, is to remove the need for the withdrawal charge, meaning that you can withdraw funds without penalty. And I accept that you referred to the 75 million figure that HMRC have collected. That is absolutely right. But at the root of the problem, and indeed why we're bringing forward a new product, is the fact of that being the withdrawal charge not being particularly well understood, people being surprised by it, which is just not something in the design of any product that we want to see.
And I just then, for my last question, if I may, Chair, is refer to the issue of the self-employed. And the original design of the lifetime ISA was both to do a product to save for a mortgage and then to retain it as a supplementary savings. Now, for the 4 million self-employed who don't have auto-enrolment, the lifetime ISA provided for them a 25% bonus savings vehicle. If that element of it is withdrawn and the lifetime ISA's successor is only for saving for a deposit, doesn't that undermine the sort of savings culture for that key group of the electorate and of the country?
No, I don't think so, because you're going to, LISAs in their current form will continue. What we're saying is that you won't be able to transfer between an existing LISA and a new product for the very understandable reason that you get the double bonus. But we are being clear about what the new product will be for.
But if from people going forward who aren't already invested in the existing LISA, they won't have the option to have that savings vehicle, will they?
There are many other ways in which people can save, but
they won't be able to get on auto-enrolment, will they, the self-employed? If they don't have a LISA currently, and your successor product stops the self-employed from using it in that way, what would be the appropriate, without auto-enrolment, mechanism for them to advantage that aspect of the savings element?
It's certainly right that the new product will be geared towards first-time buyers, but I'm not sure. Let me just, Alanna, I don't know if there's anything on I think we'd have to take away exactly the question you raised about the self-employed.
Right. Thank you very much for your answer.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Chair. On to mortgage finance limits and regulations. The Building Societies Act 1986 and the Amendment 2024 gave the Treasury the power to lay secondary legislation to update the funding limit rules for building societies. But the statutory instrument to enact this change has not yet been laid. What is the reason for the delay, and when will the Treasury lay the instrument?
So I think on the mutuals and co-op piece of work, more broadly, we have a really clear manifesto commitment to double the size of the sector, which is work that not only in the Treasury but also DBT and indeed other areas of government as well, including MHLG. So specifically, the reason for the delay on those, and they will be coming forward shortly, is because we've been focused on different, from a Treasury point of view at least, in different areas of the mutuals agenda. So we've been consulting on the reform of the common bond, which is important to allow for the strengthening and growth of the credit union sector. And we are going to come forward with the proposals for how we reform the common bond very shortly. But it's, in very blunt terms, a question of resource. Having said that, we have recently increased the amount of Treasury resource which is working on the mutuals agenda. And I suspect I may not need to rehearse the list of other work that's going on in this area, but it is a very, very important piece of the Treasury's work, not least because we need to fulfil the manifesto commitment of doubling the size of the sector.
Would we expect that instrument to be laid in advance of the summer recess in July or after the summer recess?
So on those statutory instruments, we're aiming to lay them before the summer recess.
Thank you. And the next question is, under the Leeds reforms, the Treasury's pushed the FCA to simplify mortgage affordability checks, which is obviously relaxing safety nets, increasing potentially riskier borrowing and debt. How concerned is the Treasury about arrears over the next 10 years?
Well, it's not. I think it's really important to emphasise the fact that there are there continue to be very, very important restrictions on how much consumers can borrow and indeed how much lenders can lend. So we're not talking about sort of anything which resembles deregulation. What we are saying, and we have acknowledged, indeed many have acknowledged, that mortgage lending has been tightened at the same time as house prices have been going up. And as we were discussing earlier in the session, that's meant that fewer and fewer people were able to get on the ladder. The government is very clear in our mandate to the regulators that we do want to see growth, regulation for growth across the board, and the FCA and indeed the PRA have come forward with ways in which mortgage rules are being relaxed slightly. But I come back to the point that all the important protections, not least the flow limit, which some people say should be abolished, that's not what's happening. The flow limit continues to exist. We have the consumer duty as well. So there are very, very important safeguards in place. But look, there is a fundamental point about a mortgage being a loan. This is something, clearly, when consumers enter into a mortgage, they know that there are risks associated with it. And you can't get away from those fully in any situation. So that continues to be the case.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Coming on to common hold and leasehold. Lou, you are.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the government has announced a cap on ground rents to £250 a year and reducing that to a peppercorn amount over 40 years. Minister Rigby, how did the Treasury make an assessment of the impact of these reforms, on the one hand on leaseholders and on the other hand on the institutional investors and other ultimate owners of those freeholds that benefit from ground rents income?
I think you've just set out exactly the decision that's been made in this area. I think clearly both groups are that you just mentioned, including institutional investors and leaseholders, are important. And from an institutional investor point of view, there's an extent to which you want to have certainty of income and indeed everything else. We have been in discussions with MHLG for a period of time in relation to this issue, and as well, you set out the landing that we've got to with the going to a peppercorn over 40 years and the 250 cap as it stands.
My question is more about how the Treasury quantitatively or otherwise made that assessment of the balance of impacts. In some ways, you're improving the income stream to leaseholders who will no longer be paying such onerous ground rents. You're reducing it for those investors who hold the ultimate freeholds. What's the quantitative or other assessment that you've made of that balance?
Certainly as to exact figures, I'm not sure. But we engaged, as you would expect us to do, and I in particular did in my role as City Minister, with institutional investors who made their views known as to the extent, as to the sort of nature of this policy, where they thought it should land, and all the rest of it. And as you would expect us to do, we had discussions across government as to the right landing for this policy, balancing all of the issues as indeed interests as we have to do.
I suppose what I'm trying to get at is that
if I could help,
yes.
Ms. Young, we will publish, as I think the committee knows, I'll be responding to your letter in the coming days, a full impact assessment associated with the draft bill for the committee to scrutinise as part of its PLS work.
Yeah, and just to go back to Minister Rigby, when we look at the kind of conceptual trade-offs there. A pound of ground rent to a freeholder could be redirected to the leaseholders who are paying that ground rent. Were you concerned in terms of striking that balance about systemic impacts, or was it simply a distributional question of who essentially gets the money and the relief?
I think arguably it can be both, but I think what's important from an institutional investor point of view, and as I said, we did plenty of engagement in this from this point of view, is the certainty of the investment environment. I think that has been the chief concern, and the point that was being made to me. But as I said, we had those discussions, and we've come to exactly the landing that you set out.
And just to clarify that, was the choice of 40 years as opposed to a shorter period an attempt to balance those two considerations?
Yeah.
Yes, is what Mr. Pennycook is saying.
I suppose to clarify, we, as Minister Rigby said, we took into account investor concerns when developing the policy. We think it strikes a fair balance between the interests of leaseholders, freeholders, and those invested in ground rents.
Yeah.
Just to be very clear, and I think I was in my statement to the House on the day that we published the bill, this is a very specific targeted intervention to deal with harms that are well known and to provide for a fair and efficient modern housing market in the long term. What the £250 cap will do will over time obviously be eroded away by inflation. Yeah. And the peppercorn after 40 years is broadly to ensure that we don't have huge amounts of very small value ground rent terms in leases that are frustrating the operation of a well-functioning housing market. And we can come to the interaction with housing affordability is a pertinent one in the sense of we know, and this goes back to the 1998 Housing Act, but above £250, lots of leaseholders are facing issues with remortgaging and selling properties. And in terms of short leases as well, they're having real problems. So this is where I think it interacts, the leasehold agenda, with the housing market, and both the cap on ground rents and switching on the provisions in the 2024 Act to make it cheaper and easier for leaseholders to extend their lease or buy out their freehold, ultimately make for, as well as the positive benefits for leaseholders themselves, for a more efficient, well-functioning modern housing market. As has been the aim, I should give credit for successive governments, and when the previous government initiated the reform agenda in this area, this was very specifically one of its objectives too.
Yes, and I completely see that government is around making trade-offs. It's just helpful to know how much those trade-offs are weighed and in what manner they're weighed when we're talking about the impacts of, say, residents in flats in South Reading who are paying increasingly high ground rents and getting into financial difficulties versus those institutional investors and other investors who own those freeholds. So it's interesting to just see what is the weighting in terms of which side essentially wins out. That's the purpose of this question.
Ultimately, we're one government and we are committed to addressing unregulated and unaffordable ground rents. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
And you will have a lot of opportunity. I think there was a policy paper released on the day that set out the rationale. We'll provide the response to the 2020-23 consultation previous government carried out. There'll be an impact assessment. There'll be a range of products that the committee will be able to draw on for its scrutiny.
Thank you. And finally, to Minister Pennycook, there was an assessment made by the last government in May 2024 where the former Minister of Housing assessed the impact of ground rents on different institutional investors and wrote then that ground rents represent at most a small percentage of total UK pension assets. Is that still the assessment that you have today?
Broadly, yeah. I think ground rents are a niche investment. I think we judge the risk of wider contagion to be low. We'll provide further detail, but again, it comes back to what is our objective. It's to deliver on specific commitments made in our manifesto in the context of those wider reforms, to deal with well-known harms that are taking place, that are frustrating the operation of a modern, well-functioning housing market. But to the extent that we pick this option against other options is because we, on balance, think it is the right one to benefit the concerns and strike that balance between leaseholders, freeholders and investors. But we realise, and we're very clear about this, it will have a significant impact on freehold investors. But again, we think that's a justified and proportionate intervention to deal with this specific issue.
Absolutely, and I think my leaseholders would agree with that. Moving on to stamp duty land tax, Minister Rigby, the Treasury Committee heard from Professor Tim Loenig. I appreciate this is a tax question, so I hope you can answer broadly. We heard from Professor Loenig that every single person in the country is a loser from stamp duty because it restricts people from moving. So given what Minister Pennycook mentioned before about the importance of chains of vacancies making housing more affordable, how does the Treasury assess the impact of stamp duty on mobility and on house prices?
I think the starting point here is that stamp duty as a whole is a very, very important source of revenue. It raised in the region of £14 billion last year, and indeed will do going forward. I referred earlier to the changes that we've made for the purposes of landlords, which is the important 2 percentage point increase, which equates to 5% sort of additional bit for additional dwellings as a whole, and that change specifically is going to raise £310 million, we estimate, by 2930. I don't think, well, there's certainly not a suggestion that we should. Well, in fact, it was suggested by the opposition relatively recently, I think, that we should abolish stamp duty altogether. I think, obviously, the Treasury keeps all taxes under review, but that is not something which is directly on the agenda.
Thank you.
Luke, did you want to come in on common holder?
Well, just very briefly, two questions on common hold. More broadly, Minister Pennycook, I was just interested in your view. I think, from my perspective, the government is making the right decisions in terms of ending leasehold for new flats, making it easier to transfer to common hold, and the discussion around ground rent. I just wondered what interaction that has, because that is building a very different kind of housing market in the future, what impact that has on the government's house building aspirations, and whether you see any tensions there and how the government's looking to overcome them.
I'm not sure there is a tension, but there's a challenge in that if we rush in and make changes either too fast or that are not well thought through, that there will be an impact on housing supply. That is specifically why we went out to consultation alongside the publication of the draft bill, so that we can look at a series of niche questions like, are there any justified exemptions to the ban, but also that wider point about how does the market respond at the point that you switch on the prohibitions for both leasehold houses, which was in the 24 Act and has not been switched on. We want to align the two, but the point that common hold becomes the default tenure going forward. So we hope to get feedback through that consultation that helps us make the decision about how the policy is designed and precisely how it's introduced.
And then just very specifically, will shared owners be able to embrace common hold, and what about mixed developments?
Well, the policy is designed to account for mixed developments, but I think, again, come back to, I suppose, the wider point, and a lesson that I learned in opposition with the 24 Act. This is an incredibly technical and complex policy area. We saw with the 24 Act that if you do it in a rushed way, you can make mistakes. We cannot switch on the enfranchisement provisions of the 24 Act until we make a series of changes through primary legislation. That is, say it very bluntly, I did in the oral statement, that is because the previous government allowed that bill through in the wash-up, knowing those flaws were in it. We're not going to rush and do that. So in terms of making sure that the reforms we bring forward are watertight, that is why we've published a draft bill for enhanced scrutiny. It's a serious point, though, Mr. Good, but we've published a draft bill for enhanced scrutiny because we want the committee, and I think you've got a really crucial role here in terms of the evidence you can bring, but also your own expertise. Help us find any, I hope there are none, but help us find any gremlins that are in that draft bill and make sure we fix them before we get into the point of passing it.
Can I have just a couple of quick follow-ups? So just to be clear, for shared owners now, who are leaseholders, are you specifically looking, because you were in the House, you said you would come back to us on that issue. Are you, because there will be challenges for them, because there will be two owners to their property, basically, because they're paying rent on part of it. Will they be able to embrace common hold?
The common hold, if the committee has any specific questions about the common hold legal framework or the common hold conversion process, I'm more than happy to answer them. But it is designed to allow complex mixed-use buildings to convert in a way that doesn't rely, as presently is the case, on unanimity across all homeowners in those buildings.
Thank you. That's just comfort for Alice. And then finally, just a very quick one, marriage value. We talked about affordable housing products, that once a lease gets too low, it's very expensive for people. They're losing value, expensive, they can't sell. How easily are you going to how are you going to intend to make sure that that is really resolved, because that is the feudal system kicking in, isn't it?
So the 2024 Act, passed by the previous government, unambitious in our view, but had a number of limited rights and protections that will benefit leaseholders, one of which is this new enfranchisement process. Will make it overall cheaper and easier to extend your lease or to buy out your freehold. We need to do two things to switch those provisions on. We need to make these fixes, unfortunately, we need to make these fixes through primary legislation, and we need to consult on the valuation rates that will be set by the Secretary of State. But at the point we switch those enfranchisement measures on, you'll be able to enfranchise with marriage value abolished, your ground rent extinguished at 0.1% of the property price, and the valuation rates set by the Secretary of State, and that will give you your premium. But marriage value, just very specifically, at the point that those reforms are switched on, that is what will be abolished, and you'll have all seen the High Court comprehensively dismissed the challenge from freeholders to these provisions.
Thank you very much.
Very mindful of time, John.
Yeah,
very
can I just ask
quickly,
a quick question to
Chris
Minister
Coogan.
Pennycook about those people that invested in with expecting a ground rent income that isn't capped? Can you just clarify what assessment you made of the impact of that? I mean, you recognise, and I think you said to me in the House, that it was a balanced decision you had to make. But could you just say a little bit more about what assessment you did of City Reaction and pension funds and others that will be impacted by that?
I suppose I distinguish between two sets of concerns that we weighed in the balance in the decision. There's the concerns of freehold investors who've made that investment. Although to a degree, since the 1993 Act, that has never been a permanent income stream that one can rely on in perpetuity. But we weighed those concerns. There's a separate and distinct concern, but related, between individuals who've invested in ground rent funds. I'd like to know a bit more about who was advising those people to invest in those funds. But overall, that is a fairly small number of people. And bear in mind, this goes, I think, to Ms Yang's point, we are not proposing a peppercorn of all ground rent terms, so we're not extinguishing their investment, but there will be an impact there.
And what assessment did you do of that? Did you make an assessment of what impact that will have.
We did make an assessment, and I think, I suppose to save the committee in the interest of time, that there will be a, which I don't know if it will be made available to the Treasury Cert Committee as well, but a full impact assessment that will have to go through the usual regulatory
Thank you very much.
process. Yeah.
Chris.
Chair, Economic Secretary, you made an important point that stamp duty raises 14 billion in revenue. However, Professor Tim Loynog, of course, testified to the Treasury Committee that a revenue-neutral proposal to reform stamp duty, where payments will be paid annually rather than up front, alongside council tax reform. What assessments of the Treasury and MHCLG made about this proposal?
I suspect, to the extent it was considered, it would have been considered by my colleague, the Exchequer Secretary. I assume, I don't know whether this is a long-running proposal or something that was made pre-budget. I'll let Minister Pennycook come in as to whether or not it was something that they considered, failing which I shall add it to the letter.
So I believe the proposal was to have the value of properties up to 500,000 replacing council tax with proportional property tax, and then above 500,000 replacing stamp duty with proportional property tax.
I will have to, I'm afraid, write to the committee with an answer. Well, I have my ministerial colleague with responsibility for council tax come back to you on that particular
Thank you, because I think it would be very helpful just because of the issues around stamp duty bunging up the economic system. Thank you.
Understood. And overall, obviously, it's, I should say, obviously progressive, and indeed we've got the relief for first-time buyers, in addition to all the changes that we've just discussed.
Thank you. Bobby.
Thank you. Mr. Pennycook, last summer I wrote to you about the buying and selling process, and I promise it wasn't just because I was going through hell myself. I also have constituents written to me about that issue. You launched a consultation last autumn, and I think it's closed now. Have you analysed the results? What's the feedback you can share with us? What's the government planning to do?
I'll bring Mel in as well here, but essentially we're still in the process of analysing a considerable amount of feedback, useful feedback, and we intend to set out essentially a roadmap, a plan for how we intend to take forward those reforms. But we do intend to press ahead with reforms to the process. We think that will lead to very many benefits for people involved in the home buying and selling process, including financial savings as outlined in the consultation. But I don't know if you...
Yeah, that's right. So it closed on the 29th of December. We've got a really significant amount of detailed responses, about 1,300, which we're working through all of the quite technical detail around that, as well as having more roundtables, including one with Baroness Taylor in the last few days. I think there are some messages that are clear. I think the case for change is overwhelming in terms of the need for reform, the importance of upfront information and the importance of professionalisation of estate agents. So as we advise ministers on these, we'll be thinking about those kind of key themes.
Mr. Pennycook, can I just press you on some of the principles? And I know you've got the details to work out. Yep. Is upfront information something that you think will be an outcome of this? And what about having legally binding agreements at offer stage?
I'm not going to, if you'll forgive me, preempt the decisions that we're going to make, but...
Can you give us timescales on when we're going to hear then?
I can't give you a timescale today, I'm afraid. But as with all of the many reforms we're driving forward, as early as is humanly possible, given the capacity that's available to me.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dame Meg.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pennycook, you talked earlier about we can measure you by net additional completions, and you said there would be no annual target. I think that's actually it's a sensible approach. But when will we see a volume of homes built? When do you expect to see net and additional completions go up? And I don't mean the small bits this year. I mean, when do you expect to see a significant jump?
Towards the end of the Parliament.
Yeah, okay.
And we've been really clear that meeting that 1.5 million target involves very, very high rates of house building in the final years.
Which is always an ambitious thing to put things towar's the end of a Parliament.
Indeed, but as I said to committee before, I could have picked
I think it's honest. I think it's very honest not to have an annual target, actually.
Yeah.
But then there is a challenge for every year. You're not completing many. You're obviously piling on towards the end. So, what metrics are you using? You've got net additional completions. Are there any other metrics about tenure, location, geography? Because you can build lots of one-bedroom flats somewhere, and it might be that you need family homes So are you looking at that within the mix? It's not just the total number, but metrics of
I think it goes back to my answer to an earlier question. We do see it as a responsibility of local authorities to set out which tenures are required. So we are not setting those from a national point of view. The 1.5 million target has a very simple single metric used by many governments over many decades in terms of net additional completions. We obviously monitor, both in terms of the official statistics we release, but also drawing on private sources, what is happening in the housing market, primarily in terms of applications, starts and completions, and there's a lag on all of those. So broadly, what we're seeing now in terms of completions are planning applications that almost overwhelmingly would have been made in the last Parliament. In my view, made under a MPPF, which was anti-supply. So we are now starting to see signs of greater volume of applications coming through, and they will obviously in turn translate into starts and completions.
Just to give an example, a perverse outcome of Help to Buy was that in Stoke-on-Trent, large executive homes were built in an area where people couldn't afford them, so they weren't very useful to the local population, and we all will know our own areas about what's needed. So completely get that local authorities have a role, a very important role, but from central government, much as we want to see devolution and the devolved responsibility for that, how are you going to, you can have a total number of homes, but actually that might not be the key in the front door of someone's new home in our constituencies if they're the wrong homes in the wrong places. So are you doing any evaluation, or have you got that inbuilt into the programme to make sure that the homes are moving, that they're being lived in, that they are what people need?
But I obviously can't speak to the site in question. The questions I would ask about that site is, if the local authority wanted a mix of tenures on that site, why did it not seek to achieve it through its Section 106 negotiations? But in general terms, we want, in local plans, affordable housing targets to be in place. For as much uncertainty taken out of the viability negotiations as possible on a site-by-site basis, and homes to be delivered. But you'll have perhaps seen, Chair, through our reset of the Section 106 system recently in terms of dealing with this legacy problem of uncontracted, unsold Section 106 units, but more importantly, ensuring we have a developer contribution system that in the future is working effectively. That's about a number of things: clarity on standards, transparency in various ways. That's what we're trying to drive at, and to the extent arming local authorities with what they need to ensure that on any particular site they can get the mix of homes.
Just finally, because you've got new towns are being planned, so helpful just know rough timetable on that. But also where those new towns are going to be built, because that's going to be volume, may not be where people are. So my constituents, I might not be so keen to move to a new town if it's because it's not local. That will ramp up your numbers, but not necessarily in the right places. So how are you going to make sure that the new town programme doesn't skew it so that you're hitting that? There's going to be a tendency, it happens always in government, to hit that target by hook or by crook by the end of the Parliament. But it might mean that you're focusing on those homes in those areas and not homes in areas like a number of our constituencies where we need them, but they're more complex, smaller sites.
The New Towns programme is obviously not the only thing the department is focusing on, and we want large-scale development to come forward outside of the New Towns programme. We're seeing a lot of activity, not least on the part of mayors, to look to take forward mayoral development corporations outside the programme, for example. The locations that the task force recommended were chosen on the basis of the objectives we set, i.e. to boost housing delivery, but also to boost economic growth. They've picked a set of locations that prima facie deliver on those. We're going through a process of refining the scope of the programme. We'll go out to consultation on the programme as a whole with the sites identified to take forward. But I suppose I come back to, what are the tools that a local planning authority needs to ensure that it's getting on individual sites and across its whole authority area the mix of tenures it wants. There's application to grant funding, there's what the Section 106 system needs to do to ensure that some of that is coming through development contributions. But I suppose that's what I'd say in general terms. I would want to know, if the local authority did not want those executive homes in that instance, what had happened there.
So just finally then, so in expensive areas, to build a social housing unit in Hackney costs a lot of, it's very expensive to do. That means more grant would need to go in an area where I have massive overcrowding, 1 in 2 children living in poverty, partly because of the housing situation contributing to the poverty of situation. So that means that the tendency could be in your department that you put more money into areas where it's cheaper to build that low-cost housing rather than areas like a number of ours around this table where it's very expensive. How are you going to resist that, given that you don't have an overall target on affordable housing as well?
Mel may want to add, but the fundamental point I'd make is that we have actually done in some ways the precise opposite. The new social and affordable housing programme allows for more flexibility in terms of grant rates per unit to ensure that we're getting the right homes in the right places, both in terms of social rented housing, but also other types of housing provision, community-led housing, for example, rural housing, where we know that higher grant rates are needed to ensure that those homes come forward.
Thank you. Apologies. I know that some other colleagues had some questions, but we are at time. Just to thank the ministers and officials for coming to our session this morning. I'm sure this is an area that there will continue to be a lot of focus on, but and we look forward to some of the written correspondence that you said you would follow up to both committees. Order, order.